My research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
The long-range implications of what he is doing are no different than the propaganda campaign that Hitler and his Nazi unit carried on in Germany that ended up eliminating 6 million Jewish people. Now, what is most interesting is that Hitler said the very same thing. He said, number one, that the Jews were genetically inferior to the Aryans.
If one believes that the German people would have tolerated the concentration camps and the gas chambers, if news media, like the programs that Mr. Brown is setting on, if those people were willing to bring discordant views out into the open, I don't believe the concentration camps and the gas chambers could have continued to exist in Germany.
Back in the 70s, a man named Dr. William Shockley, a noted scientist, embarked upon the mission of proving to the world that black people are genetically inferior, without, I might add, the benefit of any formal background in genetics. He became front-page news and won headlines with his controversial views. On campus after campus, unrest followed his every visit. My position then and now is that if a supremacist cannot be rationally debated, perhaps he has a point. After the debate you're now going to see, Dr. Shockley went back into oblivion.
Racism, and when we talk about racism, we're talking about the white supremacy behavior of white people. That racism was the #1 mental health problem in the nation, and it was the #1 cause of other mental health problems. And I wanted to understand what this thing of racism really is all about, because it's the thing that has caused woe and misery and suffering for the vast majority of the people on this planet that are classified as non-white. And in my attempt to understand why the necessity of white people to keep saying that white is superior and that the condition of non-white is inferior, and the more I thought about it, in conjunction with an idea that a friend of mine had, that racism was a worldwide behavioral system for the maintenance of white supremacy by a small minority of people, I put those ideas together with what we know about genetics, what we know about the condition of skin whiteness itself. The condition of skin whiteness is the genetic inability to produce skin pigment called melanin. This is a genetic recessive trait. It is a genetic deficiency state, not as defined by Francis Welsing, but defined by geneticists and dermatologists, that the inability to produce the skin pigment of melanin or melanin pigment is described as albinism. And I think that white people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that it is of prime importance for the majority of people in the world to understand why it is that white people have to, the effective majority, large numbers of white people, have to move in a hostile and an aggressive way against people of color, and have to constantly focus on it's you who's genetically inferior, because they realize that there's something wrong with their genetic status. Now,
may I take a call?
Oh, sure,
all
please.
Right. Let me, so that, because we have a number of calls, and we'll see what the public wants to find out also. Just 1 second. Hello, go ahead, please. You're on Black Journal.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question. Why does the doctor feel that his theory, Dr. Shockley, why did you feel that your theory is correct?
Well, let me say that's a long question. Let me point out one aspect. I mean, it's a question that calls for a very long answer. I think I might just at this point say that in a time like 1 hour, we may expose a problem and encourage thinking about it, and this is a very valuable thing. But to cover either Dr. Welsing's views or mine, and let me say here are, just to show that these things exist, is a pamphlet that she was good enough to give me some time ago.
This one's upside down.
Well, that one's upside down.
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
And this is one of my own. It's actually a collection of a debate.
The Imperatives of Ethnic Education is yours.
This is the issue of the journal. Mine was, the title of my paper is somewhat different from this, but I want to say that speaking for myself, if people would like to write to me at Stanford University, I have a post box there, Post Box S, which is the same as Shockley and Stanford. I will try to supply more information, and I'm sure Dr. Welsing will say what she can do about making telling people how to reach her pamphlet. Okay. But now let me say this chart that I held up a moment ago is very important in respect to this question of why I think there may be what proves a basic difference. But I'm going to say that if there were not a basic difference in intellectual capacity in the past, there probably will be a basic difference between black and white intellectual capacity in the future, simply because of the reproduction patterns. And these are Census Bureau data, and this is the most threatening aspect. And what it indicates is that for the black women of the lowest intellectual social class, which are rural farm women, generally the education is least, the average number of children is 5.4. For women with college degrees, it's 1.9. And so this is definitely unfavorable. It is reproducing far more at the bottom end and not enough to keep even at the top end.
Dr. Shockley, can
for
you
whites,
explain?
let me just finish this. For whites, the numbers are also in this direction, but nowhere nearly as severe.
Dr. Shockley, I think that in all fairness, you should explain to the audience why it is that you have, first of all, you have a very large segment of the black population who are on farms, who are deprived in cities. Why don't you explain at the time that you're showing this, who is keeping black people in a situation like they're in? I mean, it could be, you could turn it around the other way, where you could have very large numbers of black people who are exposed to educational opportunities like white people, who are exposed to housing, who are exposed to health facilities. Why don't you explain that at the same time that you put figures like that?
I'm sure you would explain it,
no, but I
Dr.
think
Welsing,
it's important
but
in
one must say first things first.
Mm-hmm.
And you've raised the basic question there, and that is whether the disadvantages are primarily a lack of opportunity or whether they are primarily a basic genetic difference. And let me mention one thing, which is that in certain areas there is no doubt about black superiority. Blacks are superior in visual acuity, and they're superior in a systematic way. Now, I don't expect that people will understand the details of this, but I simply want to show that quantitative work can be done. This happens to be a research job of my own. And what it shows, because these points that you see here lie on a line, which is not the central line, but they lie systematically on a line, what it says is that so far as visual acuity is concerned, blacks are systematically better than whites. It's as if their bell-shaped curve, their distribution curve, were pushed upwards compared to whites for visual acuity, or at least for the avoidance of bad eyesight, such that if the same shift occurred for IQ, it would mean that the average IQ distribution would be up by 9 points rather than down by about 15 points, which is the typical average.
Dr. Shockley, visual acuity is probably something that the system of white supremacy has not necessarily seen the need to affect the environment that black people are in so that it will alter the fact that they have visual acuity that is superior to whites. The fact of visual acuity is not attacked in the same way as educational opportunity and job performance is attacked. And I think that
it's evidence for a genetic difference, in my
Well, you see what I'm saying? There might be many, many more genetic differences where people of color appear superior. So Dr. Shockley, I am convinced that Dr. Shockley believes that he is perhaps elevating science with all of his charts and all of his figures, but he doesn't understand the things that propel him as a white individual in a social system that has programmed him throughout his life and programmed large numbers of people like him to focus on the genetics of people of color in such a way as to destroy people of color.
I would like to ask question, and Dr. Shockley, if you could answer it yes or no, I would appreciate it. Do you believe that black people are inferior in intelligence because of their heredity?
I have a standard statement. It is not yes or no. It's memorized. I say at the same time every time, I think. What I say is this. My research leads me, and it's a tragic conclusion, really. My research leads me inescapably to the opinion that the major cause of the American Negro's intellectual and social deficits is hereditary and racially genetic in origin, and thus not remediable to a major degree by practical improvements in environment.
All right. If you believe that the position relatively of black Americans to white Americans is based on a genetic inferiority, and I will accept the responsibility for that word, then what do you see as the solution to the problem?
Well, I see the first aspect of this is to prevent the problem from becoming worse by dysgenics. This first word
Would
that
you
I
translate
mentioned.
dysgenics for me and the audience?
What I
Would that
meant
be sterilization?
No. Dysgenics, you see, means what that other chart I showed you says.
Should blacks,
the least effective element.
Should blacks be sterilized?
No. I have a...
But if blacks are a problem, and we do not allow...
This is inhumane. And
Dr.
I think one
Shockley
can
wants
find more
black
humane
people to
solutions to this.
Well, then how would... Then
I would propose something in which one of the key phrases is regardless of sex, race, or welfare status. And this is the proposal. I call it a thinking exercise. It's mentioned in that pamphlet that I showed that you can obtain. And it goes this way, that you would offer a bonus to everyone to be sterilized. Now, we know we have a population explosion problem. We know that in India that bonuses in the form of transistor radios are offered to people.
Would this bonus be directed to black people specifically, more than whites?
Mr. Brown, what did I say just a moment ago? I said, regardless of sex, race, or welfare status.
Now, there is a group...
Dr. Shockley.
That's what I say.
There is a group of white people to whom this offer should be made also.
Absolutely.
Now,
the offer is based upon the best estimates, best scientific estimates that one can have of any genetically carried disabilities. Now, there are some, I think, that any humane person would have no doubt about. And Dr. Welsing talked about dominant and recessive genes. I want to point out that sometimes a dominant gene can be a very bad thing, and it is a very bad thing for a neurological disease called Huntington's chorea, which is something like multiple sclerosis.
In white people than black people.
That is correct. And I think that one should offer a large bonus for anyone who might be potentially carrying Huntington's chorea.
Dr. Shockley,
beyond this, it goes on with some other factors in this, but Dr. Welsing wishes to speak.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think blacks
would you suggest that all of these white people who are carrying these defective genes, you know, whose families may carry these defective genes, that they be examined and it would be suggested to them that they be sterilized? Would you suggest this?
Yes, I think I would, probably, in general.
Go ahead, your Black Journal, please.
What we know about ancient black civilizations, how can American blacks suddenly be genetically regressive?
Thank you.
Let me just say this. What is very interesting is in the study of biology, biologists who have studied evolution, one of the very interesting things that they say is that the more functional skin pigment cells in the animal kingdom, the higher you are on the scale of phylogenetic ascension. In other words, nature, in the course of evolution, went to its highest state when it produced a cell that could produce pigment, and that we were sliding backwards. The mutation to albinism is a step backwards in the scale of evolution. Are you aware of that, Dr. Shockley?
No, I'm not aware of that particular one. I am aware of another basic genetic difference, and that is that the rate of maturation of a neurological system gets longer and longer the more advanced the animal is. And that is one of the items on the racial difference, that the neurological development of blacks is faster than whites. Black babies walk on the average a month earlier than white babies. And the period of
black
gestation...
people are much more creative also than white.
Dr. Wells, Shockley, correct me if I'm incorrect. Didn't the Giselle schedule, which tested the intelligence of children, make a correlative between intelligence and walking early?
Yes.
And I would think it probably would have been negative.
No, it was not. It was positive.
Well,
the motor skills on the Giselle schedule indicated that earlier precocious walking children, there was a correlation between that and high intelligence.
This may be true. It might be true within a group. I'm not sure of that.
Well, maybe
I know that there is a correlation in terms of things earlier than walking. In this, at the 6-month stage, Nancy Bailey at Berkeley has established that white children who come from the most advanced families and who later, when they become older, are out at the top, at the first 6 months they are relatively retarded compared to children who are from families of less accomplishment and who don't go as far. But this, so there are a number of these things certainly to be brought in.
Fine.
But this,
Giselle's schedule is a very authentic, accepted, institutional, psychological experiment.
And so is the Nancy Bailey early test.
I'd like to take another caller. You're on Black Journal. Go ahead, please.
Hello. This question is addressed to Dr. Welsing. First, I would like to say that Mr. Brown and Dr. Welsing disprove immediately Dr. Shockley's concept, because here we have two highly intelligent, gifted people. And but getting this out of the way, Dr. Welsing, wouldn't you agree that there is a strong genetic component to the inheritance of intelligence? Geneticists believe that 80% component is hereditary. Let me finish, Dr. Welsing. And then also, I think the association of skin color with intelligence is an erroneous concept. And I want your views on this. Isn't it true that the historic fate of black people, the tragic deprivation, the conditions under which they were raised, any people raised under these conditions would have an hereditary, evolutionary background, which could lead to poor capacity to generalize, to conceptualize, to be creative in the form field of ideas, and develop other excellent attributes. Now, this is not a racist idea. This could happen to any group who has a tragic history of the black people.
Thank you.
No, I do not feel that there's any evidence to suggest that 80% of the ability to come to terms with your environment that has to do with heredity. I think that much of it has to do with the environmental opportunity that the genetic material is exposed to. I think that if we look at the black people, if we just take the black group, and we look at those people who have been able to achieve, and we look at their backgrounds, we will find that they have had substantial social and economic opportunities that maybe some of the segment of the black population has not had. We will find the same thing in the white group. Those white people who have been socioeconomically deprived and at the bottom of the economic scale for whites, that these people are not performing in the same way that people who have extended socioeconomic opportunity. One of the very interesting things is that white women are now talking about women's liberation, and they are looking at their performance relative to white men, and they are saying, and all of the spokesmen for white women, and men and women are also saying, that the reason that the white woman has less confidence in her performance and is not performing as well, relatively speaking, as the white male has been the attitudes within the white family as to the role of the woman versus the role of the man. Now, what is interesting is that when white people are looking at the difference in the performance of the white woman and the white man on IQ tests, they can account for that on the basis of environmental influences. However, when they shift over into looking at whites relative to people of color, somehow they want to drop that understanding and that awareness.
We use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. Today, it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways in which it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, exclusion from jury service, suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it.
We're joined now from Columbus, Ohio, by Michelle Alexander, author of the new book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Her latest article exploring how the war on drugs gave birth to what she calls a permanent American undercaste. It's available at TomDispatch.com. She's a former director of Racial Justice Project at the ACLU of Northern California. She now holds a joint appointment at the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity and the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University. Michelle Alexander, welcome to Democracy Now! Nearly half of America's young black men are behind bars or have been labeled felons for life. That's an astounding figure. Also, what does it mean in terms of their rights for the rest of their lives?
Yes, thanks largely to the war on drugs, a war that has been waged almost exclusively in poor communities of color, even though studies have consistently shown that people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites. The war on drugs waged in these ghetto communities has managed to brand as felons millions of people of color for relatively minor, nonviolent drug offenses. And once branded a felon, they're ushered into a permanent second-class status, not unlike the one we supposedly left behind. Those labeled felons may be denied the right to vote, are automatically excluded from juries, and may be legally discriminated against in employment, housing, access to education, public benefits, much like their grandparents or great-grandparents may have been discriminated against during the Jim Crow era.
Well, you mentioned that in the war on drugs, 4 out of 5 people arrested have actually been arrested for use of drugs, not for possession or use of drugs, not for the sale of drugs. Could you talk about how both political parties joined in this increasing incarceration around drug use?
That's right. The war on drugs, contrary to popular belief, was not declared in response to rising drug crime. Actually, the war on drugs, the current drug war, was declared in 1982 by President Ronald Reagan at a time when drug crime was actually on the decline. A few years later, crack cocaine hit the streets in poor communities of color across America, and the Reagan administration hired staff to publicize crack babies, crack mothers, crack dealers in inner city communities in an effort to build public support and more funding and ensure more funding for the new war that had been declared. But the drug war had relatively little to do with drug crime even from the outset. The drug war was launched in response to racial politics, not drug crime. The drug war was part of the Republican Party's grand strategy, often referred to as the Southern strategy, an effort to appeal to poor and working class white voters who were threatened by, felt vulnerable, threatened by the gains of the civil rights movement, particularly desegregation, busing, and affirmative action. And the Republican Party found that it could get Democrats, white, working class poor Democrats, to defect from the Democratic New Deal coalition and join the Republican Party through racially coded political appeals on issues of crime and welfare. And the strategy worked like a charm. Within weeks of the Reagan administration's publicity campaign around crack cocaine, images of black crack users and crack dealers flooded our nation's television sets and forever changed our nation's conception of who drug users and dealers are. And law enforcement efforts became targeted on poor communities of color in the drug war. And drug law enforcement agencies, state and local law enforcement task forces committed to drug law enforcement have been rewarded for drastically increasing the volume of drug arrests. Federal funding flows to state and local law enforcement that boosts the volume of drug arrests, the sheer numbers. Many people think the drug war, has been targeted at violent offenders or aimed at rooting out drug kingpins. But nothing could be further from the truth. Local and state law enforcement agencies get rewarded for the sheer numbers of drug arrests, and federal drug forfeiture laws allow state and local law enforcement officials to keep 80% of the cash, cars, homes that they seize from suspected drug offenders, granting to law enforcement a direct monetary interest in the profitability and longevity in the drug war. And the results have been predictable. Millions of poor people of color have been rounded up for relatively minor nonviolent drug offenses. In fact, in 2005, 4 out of 5 drug arrests were for possession. Only 1 out of 5 were for sales. Most people in state prison for drug offenses have no history of violence or significant selling activity. And during the 1990s, the period of the greatest expansion of the drug war, nearly 80% of the increase in drug arrests were for marijuana possession, a drug now widely believed to be less harmful than alcohol or tobacco, and at least as prevalent in middle-class and suburban white communities as it is in the ghetto.
Michelle Alexander.
President Clinton.
Yes, I just wanted to bring it up to President Obama because this piece you wrote, very interesting, at TomDispatch.com, called The Age of Obama as Racial Nightmare. Explain.
Yes, well, you know, today, people around the globe, people of color in particular, have been celebrating the election of Barack Obama as kind of our nation's triumph over race and the history of racial caste in America. Yet the appearance of racial equality, the superficial appearance of racial equality that Barack Obama's election has afforded, serves to mask a deeply disturbing underlying racial reality, which is that large segments, you know, a majority of African American men in some urban areas are either under the control of the criminal justice system or branded felons for life, locked in a permanent second-class status. This vast new racial undercaste, and I say caste, not class, because this is a population which is locked into an inferior status by law and by policy. This vast population has been rendered largely invisible through affirmative action and the appearance of success, with, you know, a handful of African Americans doing well in universities and corporations, the sprinkling of people of color through elite institutions in the United States due to affirmative action policies and the limited progress of middle class and upper middle class African Americans creates the illusion of great progress and helps to mask the underlying racial reality, which is that a racial caste system has been reborn in the United States. Young men of color in particular are labeled as felons, labeled as criminals at very young ages, often before they even reach voting age, before they turn 18. Their backpacks are searched, they're frisked on their way to school, while standing waiting for the school bus to arrive. Once they learn to drive, their cars are searched, often dismantled in a search for drugs. The drug war waged in these poor communities of color has created generations of black and brown people who have been branded felons and relegated to a permanent second-class status for life. And the reason for their excommunication from our society, our mainstream society, is for engaging in precisely the same kind of drug activity that is largely ignored in middle-class and upper-middle-class white communities. People often say to me, well, if you know, black and brown men don't want to be labeled felons, well, then they just shouldn't commit drug crimes. But, you know, we have known as a nation for a long time now that simply prohibiting drug activity does not lead people to stop using illegal drugs. We learned that lesson with alcohol prohibition. Banning the use of alcohol didn't discourage many people from using or selling alcohol. And people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites.
Well, we turn now to the second part of our interview with legal scholar, civil rights advocate, and author Michelle Alexander. Her book is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Former director of the Racial Justice Project at the ACLU of Northern California, she now holds a joint appointment at the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity and the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University.
We continued yesterday's interview with Michelle Alexander after the broadcast, and we started with a clip of President Obama's speech at the NAACP Centennial Celebration last year.
We've got to say to our children, yes, if you're African American, the odds of growing up amid crime and gangs are higher. Yes, if you live in a poor neighborhood, you will face challenges that somebody in a wealthy suburb does not have to face. But that's not a reason to get bad grades. That's not a reason to cut class. That's not a reason to give up on your education and drop out of school. No one has written your destiny for you. Your destiny is in your hands. You cannot forget that. That's what we have to teach all of our children. No excuses.
Michelle Alexander, no excuses. Can you respond to President Obama?
Well, I think, a major point that is often lost in debates about the so-called underclass, poor African Americans who are trapped in racially segregated ghettos. The point that's often missed is that huge percentages of the people residing in those communities have been branded felons, and therefore discrimination is perfectly legal against them. Employment discrimination is perfectly legal. Most job applications, ranging from Burger King clerk to accountant, ask whether you've been convicted of a felony. And studies show that, about 70% of employers say they won't even consider hiring someone who's been convicted of a drug felony. Public housing is off limits to you if you've been convicted of a felony. For a minimum of 5 years, you are deemed ineligible for public housing once you've been branded a felon. Discrimination in private housing markets, perfectly legal. So here you are, recently released from prison, having been branded a felon for engaging in precisely the kind of drug activity that's ignored in middle-class white communities. You're branded a felon, you can't get a job, and then public housing is off limits to you. Where are you expected to sleep? So an aunt or grandmother takes you in. Now let's say you're one of the lucky few who managed to get a job. Well, up to 100% of your wages can be garnished. That's right, up to 100% of your wages can be garnished to pay the costs of your imprisonment. Increasing numbers of states are requiring former prisoners to pay back the cost of their imprisonment, pay back court costs, court processing fees, even the cost of their representation, even if they've been assigned a public defender, and back child support. You're required to pay back all the accumulated child support that you incurred while you were in prison. So up to 100% of your wages can be garnished, even if you're one of the lucky few who managed to get a job after being branded a felon. What is the system designed to do? The system is designed to send you right back to prison, which is, in fact, what happens to the vast majority of people who are released. About 70% of former prisoners are returned within 3 years. And the majority of those who are returned within 3 months, because the obstacles, the legal barriers to just surviving on the outside are so great. People often say to me, well, I know somebody who is a felon and who managed to get a job. It's possible to get a job, they say. Well, it may be possible, but what kind of job? Why is it that, our young kids, young black and brown kids, are expected to be locked into low-wage jobs for life if they're lucky enough to get them? But kids in other communities are given the opportunity to go on to college, to compete for a full range of job opportunities. During the Jim Crow era, the problem wasn't that black people couldn't get jobs. It was that they were locked permanently in a lower tier of jobs. And that's the reality. That's the reality. For us to tell young African-American kids in ghetto communities, your destiny is in your own hands, that may be an inspirational message. But for many of them, it may turn out to be a lie. because the rules and laws that govern ghetto communities today and the war that is being waged there ensures that a large majority of black and brown boys in those communities will be branded felons and then relegated to a permanent second-class status for life.
Michelle Alexander, I'd like to ask you about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Governor Schwarzenegger at his State of the State address in January called for privatizing some of the state's prisons.
The priorities have become out of whack over the years. I mean, think about it. 30 years ago, 10% of the general fund went to higher education, and only 3% went to prisons. Today, almost 11% goes to prisons, and only 7.5% goes to higher education. Spending 45% more on prisons than universities is no way to proceed into the future.
Your reaction to Governor Schwarzenegger's newfound concern about the situation with the prison system in his state?
Yes, well, many people reacted with glee to Governor Schwarzenegger's kind of apparent embrace of the books not bars theme that had been a rallying cry for grassroots organizations in the state for more than a decade. But if you read between the lines there, what Schwarzenegger is actually saying is not that we should change our laws to ensure that nonviolent drug offenders don't end up spending years or decades behind bars, or that we should rethink harsh mandatory minimum sentences or our 3 strikes laws, which have been responsible for the prison boom in California and other states around the country. His remedy has not been to reduce prison populations through kind of rethinking draconian laws, but instead to privatize, try to save money, make warehousing and caging human beings cheaper by privatizing the system. Certainly, you know, this announcement must have been met with glee on Wall Street, where, you know, many companies like the Correctional Corporation of America, you know, is making millions of dollars and hopes to expand its market of caging human beings for a profit. So sadly, although, you know, Schwarzenegger embraced the books not bars motto, what he actually plans to do in practice is, or may well be, worse than the system that we have today.
Main message that I spread wherever I go in the country is that we as a people are at war. When I say we are at war, what I mean is a state of war exists anytime anybody tries to take from you that which is rightfully yours. It could be your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, your education, your ability to move along freely in a society from point A to point B. A state of war exists anytime anybody or any system organizes against you to take your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness, your proper education, your ability to move from point A to point B. So we as an African people are at war. Whether or not we choose to acknowledge it is one thing or another. But as you know, if you ignore the fact that you're in a state of war, the end result usually is that you will be smashed by the fact that it exists and you have taken no actions to organize yourself. I think it's important that we also understand some basic definitions so that we understand who we're talking about, even when we say we. When I use the term we, I'm talking about African people. When I say African people, I mean those people who come from the continent of Africa who were dropped off in various places around the world. So if you're from Grenada, if you're from Panama, if you're from Guyana, if you're from Jamaica, if you're from certain parts of Latin America, these are all black people dropped off in different places in the world. That is who I'm talking about when I'm talking about African people. Why do I stress the importance of Africa? Africa is not just a power base and a land base, it's a way of life. And I think it's important for us as a people to recognize that. First of all, I think the reason why we reject Africa is because of the way that we have been portrayed in the United States media. Usually when you see pictures of Africa or commercials about Africa, what you see is a black baby with a big head and a bloated stomach. You'll see flies buzzing all over the place. Then you'll see some white woman who will come out and say, "Excuse me, I'm Sally Struthers." This is Abdullah. Abdullah doesn't have any food. His people have forgotten how to plant seeds. And he doesn't have a father. And you'll be surprised surprised what 50 cents can do for Abdullah. So if you can just put it in an envelope and send it to us, we will be able to take care of him, his family, and his entire community. Now, the normal African reaction to that is to reject that particular image, because that's not an image that gives you a feeling of pride. That's not an image that makes you want to claim that particular land, and that's not an image that wants you to makes you want to claim that particular people. If you see a documentary on Africa, usually you will see some naked African people running around. You'll have some white British narrator who's trying to explain what these people are doing, and he usually has absolutely no idea what these people are doing. And you might see some type of a ceremony which involves some type of blood or some type of rituals that are never understood, never explained by the people who claim to narrate and own the footage of the film. And so what has happened is you're reinforced in a negative way about yourself. And so your self-image makes you reject yourself. And when you reject yourself, quite naturally, you destroy yourself, your community, and your own people. Most of the images of young African men today are images of criminals. Usually you can turn on the news at 5 or 6 or 7 p.m. and see several young black men being carted away by the police. Usually their heads are down, their hands are to the back, or their arms are up, leaning up against the wall or something of that nature. So the image of African people is not something that African people ourselves would want to embrace. Usually if you see an African woman on the United States media, it is something that is, she is someone who is portrayed in a negative light. She is someone who is portrayed as some type of a hooker, prostitute, oversexed, somebody who is not intelligent, one-dimensional, flat, so on and so forth. And so as a people, the main thing that we have to struggle against is embracing ourselves and rejecting the cultures of other people in terms of our own definition and understanding who we are. So I stand before you as an African woman, and I say, when I say we, I mean African people. Africa also represents a way of life and a way of thinking. To give you an example, in America, most things are based on rugged individualism. I, me, and go for self is the basic philosophy, which comes out of a capitalistic thought process. In Africa, the word I means we. I is we, and we is them, and them is they, and they is us, and us is I am you, and you is I. So in an African philosophy, we are all interlocked to one another. So there's no way if you're doing bad that I can be doing good. If you're doing bad, I'm doing bad. If you're doing good, I'm doing good. So it's a philosophy that exists. And what happens is this is a philosophy that makes for a better community, makes for a better global system, makes for a better way of life. And when we reject Africa, we reject ourselves, our culture, our philosophy, our ways of thinking. One thing that is commonly known about us is that the majority of us reject our natural selves. The majority of us reject our home base. The majority of us don't move to develop our home base. And so we represent, when we move around the world, a state of confusion and a state of misunderstanding. African people developed a way of life which taught young men what is the definition of being a man, which taught young women what is the definition of being a woman. Since we have rejected Africa and rejected the philosophy, we have a lot of young brothers and sisters in America, the majority I would say, who don't have any understanding of what it is to be a man or what it is to be a woman. So the societies that organized in ancient Africa would get together, and the older women would tell younger women stories about how to deal with your relationship, how to get the fruits to the market, how to create an economic base for the family, would teach men how to be hunters, how to organize things. And so since these things have been removed and our people have been devastated, most people are not understanding how to do certain basic fundamental things as African men and African women. So we get our definitions from the television. So you have the average young black male in the inner city area believing that the definition of being a man is being a criminal. The definition of being a man is shooting people, being shot, being incarcerated, doing time at particular hardcore correctional facilities. You have young women who get their definition of womanhood from Erica Kane on All My Children, who get their definition of womanhood from Joan Collins on Dynasty, who who get their definition of womanhood from white women who are divorced from their same historical understanding, divorced from their same historical experience, who didn't grow up in the projects, didn't grow up in the inner cities, and won't have the problems that are particular to African women. So when you reject your African self, you not only reject your power base, which the rest of the entire world recognizes represents a certain amount of resources, which the rest of the entire world recognizes represents a strategic military position, which the rest of the entire world recognizes represents certain mineral wealth and resource wealth. But when you fail to recognize that yourself, you fail to establish a relationship, to embrace the continent, and to develop a relationship on any level, emotional, business, social, philosophical, militarily, and as a result you have an entire landmass that goes undeveloped for our people. Racism. Racism is a system that, based on race, denies people access to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness, to proper education, to control over their own resources. Racism is a system which denies people access based on race to those particular things. So what does that mean? That means that this term that they use, reverse racism, does not exist. Reverse racism as a term is a contradiction in words, because it insinuates that somewhere along the line, we as African people evened up the economic score, received some type of reparations, developed institutions of education where we taught masses of white people to hate themselves and destroy themselves, developed industry where we taught African people to be producers and taught all whites to be consumers, developed a military where we drafted all white people and sent them to fight black battles. Racism is a system. So anybody who wants to know the definition of racism must know that it is a system that is predicated on the notion of power. If you as a race do not have the power to systematically deny people access to life, to liberty, to proper education, to industry, to money making, to controlling your environment, you cannot be considered a racist. So what is an African person who feels bad about white people? What is an African person who feels annoyed about racism? What is an African brother that stands on the corner and says, you know, I'm tired of all of these whiteys? What word do we use to define him? The word that we use is prejudice. Prejudice means to prejudge a situation. And I would advise all people, as an African woman who is also a historian, that you should prejudge every situation that you encounter in the United States of America. What do I mean by that? Well, if somebody's great-great-great-grandfather had stabbed my great-great-great-grandfather in the back, and then their great-great-grandfather had lied and cheated and stolen land from my great-great-grandfather, and then their great-grandfather had raped my great-grandmother, and then the grandfather had cheated and manipulated my grandfather, and father had lied and stolen from my father, what would make me think that their sons and daughters would not do the same thing?
Now, I find that when I give talks about this issue, a good percentage of the folks there are tempted to say, what are you talking about? Mass incarceration is not a system of racial control, it's a system of crime control. Now, if black people would just stop committing so many crimes, they wouldn't have to worry about going to prison and being stripped of their basic civil and human rights. But again, in Dr. King's honor, I'm committed to telling the truth, the whole truth about this. And the truth is, our prison population has quintupled, not doubled or tripled, quintupled, for reasons that have stunningly little to do with crime or crime rates. We now have the highest rate of incarceration in the world, a penal system unprecedented in world history. But this is not, I repeat, not due crime rates. Crime rates have fluctuated over the past 30 years. Gone up, gone down. Today, as bad as they are in some cities, including Chicago, nationwide, crime rates are at historical lows. But incarceration rates have consistently soared. Most criminologists and sociologists today will admit crime rates and incarceration rates in the United States, they've moved independently of one another.
Listen, there are people out there who say, look at all the progress we're making.
Look at the Urban League report.
I am not one of those people. Nevertheless, there are examples of integrated communities. Truly are.
But see, the answer is not a question of are there a few black people living where white people live. The issue is that if we are going to have peace on the planet, there has to be justice. And white supremacy, where you have the tiniest number of people on the planet, holding down the vast majority of people on the planet, happens to be the highest form of injustice.
Yeah.
And so if we are going to have peace, see, I'm not talking about destroy white people, I'm saying, but we do have to eliminate white supremacy. And I say in the back of that paper, the challenge to white behavioral scientists, help people who classify themselves as white become comfortable with their color and comfortable with their minority status, so that they are not feeling negative and then mistreating all of the people that they say are, what, non-white.
Right. Are you there, caller? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here, Phil. Hi. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm white. I can't believe that she's saying that the white people would like to be, I'm assuming she's saying black, not of a darker skin color, but black. I myself am very, very fair-skinned, brunette with green eyes, and I have no desire to be dark.
Why?
Why? I like my color. I was attractive enough that I went to modeling school. I do admit that I do use blush. I do not use blush to, as you say, give myself color. I use it to accent my cheekbones, give myself better appearance.
Do you sunbathe?
No, I don't. And as a matter of fact, I love the beach, and my husband and I, when we've gone to the Bahamas a few times, when we have, I have to wear sunscreen. You know, I don't turn tan. Okay. I get red.
Right.
I grew up on the beach, and I had a minimal tan. But
you see, but I'm asking.
Well, hang on one second.
I want to be clear. Is she saying I want to be dark, but I don't want to be black?
Yes.
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 And,
so you'd like to be a little darker than you are?
No, I wouldn't say so. I'm very pleased with my color.
Well, then why do you put rouge on?
To accent my cheekbones.
Highlight the cheekbones.
But why do you suntan? Because the American Dermatological Society would prefer...
Probably for that reason.
But she goes to the beach.
She does go to the beach.
Because I like the water.
I gotta go.
I like the water. I grew up in California.
Let me try one more. Are you there, caller? Go ahead.
Hi. I'm also white, and I'm very comfortable with being white. I think that she's crazy to think that white people want to be black. You know, we might want to have a little color, but I wouldn't want the features of a black person. And as far as...
The what?
She does not want the features of a black person. Do you see, this is...
Hold on.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, in other words, that's racism, but pigmentation isn't?
Well, no, I'm saying that to say I wouldn't want to be, I mean, I can be happy who I am and not say something is negative about the other person.
Well, look, we've got a break here. Is there a, you know, one of the agonies here is half of this audience does not believe that they're racist.
Oh, wait, well, let me...
I am not more than half.
Let me ask this.
You can't fix it if you don't know you have it.
But wait a minute, I want to ask...
How do you explain what's going on here in this country?
I want to say then, who is? That's like going to Germany. I went to Germany in 1957. And I wanted to live with German people and ask them, did they understand what they were doing?
Yeah.
You know, taking their neighbors away and burning them up. Did they understand what was happening? Yeah. Everybody that I talked to knew what was going on. They did nothing. But if you go and say, well, now, who believed what Hitler was saying?
They all say
Nobody. Everybody says no. You see, every single person says no.
So
I didn't have anything to do with it.
the people who are saying they're not racist, you're accusing them
No,
not doing
no.
it.
I'm not accusing. What I would do is, if you have to take a break, is give my definition. You see, give my definition of what I say that racism is.
A functional definition of racism, white supremacy, which you identify with white supremacy, is therefore, for all practical purpose, as follows. The behavioral syndrome of individual and collective color inferiority and numerical inadequacy, which includes patterns of thought, speech, and action as seen in members of the white organization or race. And we'll be back in just a moment.
People are racism. Okay, there is a lot of people who do have that in them, but I think the majority of the people like people as they are. And if you're educated...
You mean you like your kind, you mean?
No, all kinds of people. It doesn't have to be your kind, because
You
I
feel
can look
you
at a
have
person...
any of it? This thing we call racism?
No, because I live in Colonia, and we have a whole development of black people, okay? And, well, wait, no, I went to school with them, okay? And I learned to deal with them. I think that if you learn to... Well, we mixed as a group. In other words, we weren't different. We weren't treated different. We weren't treated different, so we were all one kind of person.
Hold your thought. You hang on a minute. What's the matter? What?
This study that was done in 69 and 70, I'd like to know what she's done lately to erase and eradicate racism and to improve
How do you
situations.
feel about what she's saying?
I don't care for it at all.
I want to just say that I feel I am a racist, but every black that calls Whitey a Whitey is also a racist. And
Wait a minute. Let me answer that. You see, within a family, people might call each other names. But when we come to the white people on the planet, the majority having organized themselves for white genetic survival, then when a white person can determine what is going to happen to a person of color, that is a difference, because then we're talking about a system of power that can say you can or you can't, or if I want to go back to Germany, because people do a lot of talking about the Holocaust. When the Semites were told, put on this yellow star because you're not white, and you can't go to the university, and you have to live in the ghetto, and you are going to be removed from your homes, that is power. It's not just a question of somebody saying, I don't like John, I don't like Betty. When you have the power to make it impossible for people to live a constructive existence, then that's a difference.
But what we're trying to figure out is why we want that power to do that to another person in the first place. And you're saying white people do it to people of color because they feel,
I think it's a matter of economics more than anything else. And if you're a fair person, you're a fair person. And if this, I don't care who is my neighbor. If they can afford to be my neighbor, if they are the same economic ability that our family have, then they're fine. They're welcome to be my neighbor.
Oh, wait a minute.
We'll be back. I'll give you a chance in just a moment.
You, and then instead they gave you a big fat book and knew that you didn't even have a clue how to understand it. Because see, they gave you a book of mysticism, a book of witchcraft and sorcery and spells, but then they gave you an education that was not going to even allow you to comprehend it. See, they don't give you a big fat book like this Bible and then don't give you the education to comprehend what they've given you. See, your 12th grade education is not going to equip you to understanding this book of spells, this book of sorcery, this book of magic, this book of mysticism. So your 12th grade education is not going to give you the knowledge on how to deal with that information in there. And that's why many of you so lost today. And you go back week after week after week for year after year, and you don't know no more after 10, 15 years of sitting in church than you did the first day you set your behind on the pew. Now, why is that? Don't you see something wrong with that picture? that after 5, 10 years of going to a building, you should be qualified to teach somebody something. You shouldn't need a pastor or a preacher or a minister after 5, 6 years of going to somebody's church. You should be able to now lead and teach somebody yourself. Even the average college, after 3, 4, 5 years, you now have a degree in something, but you got people who have gone to churches year after year for 10 and 15 years, and they can't lead a sheep. They couldn't lead me to the corner. They couldn't lead me to the corner. And they are still in need of a preacher and a pastor to tell them what the book that they've been studying for the last 10, 15 years say. Now that's ridiculous. That shows that you have not grown. That shows that you have no growth. So what is it all about? That you go sit up and listen to information week after week and you don't spiritually grow. That you stay stagnant. You don't see something wrong with that picture? I do. I see something wrong with that picture, and you should too. Because learning is about growth and evolution, not staying stagnant, not constantly being in need of a teacher for no 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Okay, you live entirely in your thinking. Every day the thoughts which you receive control your emotions and direct your reactions to the circumstances, the events, and the people in your life. Of course, you must recognize thoughts before you can act upon them. The rewards, the conditions, and the circumstances of your life will be measured by your thinking. The greatest and the most priceless gift you can receive is a transforming thought. A thought that leads you back to the recognition of your supreme powerful self. Now, this is what we haven't given our children. See, we haven't given our children any transforming thoughts. And you know how I know that? Because all I have to do is go around the city and look at our children and the destructive behavior that they are engaged in. And I know that if they had transforming thoughts, they wouldn't be engaged in that destructive behavior. So who's responsible for not having taught them a sense of identity and a sense of empowerment about themselves? Some distortions in language can keep you from accomplishing goals in life, and you should look for examples of these forms of expression in yourself and in others. So it's telling you right here that distortions in language can actually keep you from accomplishing goals in life, and you should look for examples of these forms of expression in yourself and in others. And expressions such as "I can't" is neither true nor productive. And you must not look for reasons why you can't, but ask questions that will lead you back to power, such as what would happen if I could. Thoughts such as these give you a list of possibilities and actions that you may not have seen before. When you claim depression for yourself, "Oh, I feel so depressed," and ask yourself why you find yourself in this state. A long list of reasons will invade your thinking, but if you ask, "How am I depressed?" exact, precise language, you begin to realize that there are certain things you do to create that state. What do you picture in your mind? Do you picture the worst possible scene? What do you say to yourself? Do you speak in slow, low, and sad tones? "I'm so depressed today. I feel terrible. I can't seem to do anything right." And then you sigh a long, pitiful sigh. How do you sit? How do you walk? How do you breathe? Depression doesn't just happen. You have to work at it. Now that's interesting. It says depression you got to work at being depressed. Now I know a lot of people that they work real hard at being depressed and being negative. And then they blame other people. Just like people who smoke cigarettes and then get cancer and they think that they shouldn't have got that cancer. See, you know how much work it takes you to go get a pack of cigarettes? You got to buy them. You got to open the pack of cigarettes. You got to smoke it. And you got to do that repeatedly for a long time. And then, wow, you catch cancer. Okay, that didn't happen overnight. Didn't you work to get that? then you should not be surprised that now you have cancer. You worked very hard to give yourself that cancer. So why are you now upset with the results? You shouldn't be. So that's the principle that he's speaking of in this book. When you have to work so hard to have yourself in a negative state of mind, then why now are you complaining about the results? Well, you shouldn't be, but of course we do. Because we think we didn't do it. Somebody else is to blame. It says once you become aware of how you put yourself in certain emotional states, you can begin to create the opposite effect. The lesson to be learned in these examples is that no matter how dismal a situation may appear to you, there is a way of questioning and examining your language and your actions that leads you away from the problem into the area of powerful solution. You must have the courage to examine yourself. You know, you don't even have a clue how to begin to get to this level because religion has really regressed you and has really put you on more of a childlike level of understanding these laws, you know. So you got a long way to go to catch up to even comprehending this information. And so this is the harm that was done to you, because now that you need this information and you need the ability to process this information so that you can move on to higher states of vibration, you can't do it. Because in your consciousness has only been locked into certain things. And so you're going to have to begin to unlock your consciousness, begin to throw away some of that programming, or most of it you're going to have to throw away all of it. Because it has not served you, it has not helped you. It has really cut you off from the all. It has cut you off from spirit. And it has cut you off from each other. That's why you're so full of self-hate. That's why you can come cut my throat. That's why if I borrow $10 from you and don't give it back to you, you're ready to kill me. See? And that's not love, you know. So you have to realize that they have really, really messed y'all up. Because they withheld this information. This information has been around a long time. This ain't no new information. It may be new to you because you just hearing about it, but this is not new information. They did have this. They chose not to give it to you. And as long as you continue to operate from a consciousness where you don't even know yourself, you truly cannot tell. You truly cannot teach anything that comes from your womb about itself when you don't know yourself. And I know you black women don't know yourself. Because if you knew yourself, you wouldn't have gold hair and hazel eyes and blue eyes and gray eyes. So you wouldn't walk around looking like that and your fake fingernails and your tight clothes and looking like a harlot. See, if you knew yourself, you would not think that that would be the appropriate way for you to look. So I know you don't know yourself. But see, guess what? I'm here to help you. I'm here to come to teach you how to know yourself again. But the main thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to put them Bibles down. You're going to have to put them Qurans down. And all them other books that white God has given you to serve. Because obviously your white God, and you know your God is white. You know God is white now. Don't pretend that God ain't white. Let me show you how I know God is white. See how much time we got. Let me show. We got 10 minutes. I'm going to show y'all. Because I'm going to let you know the white folks did not deceive you. They didn't deceive y'all about God. He told you plain and clearly who God was. He told you who God was. He put it on his money. Got this money right here. See, this is a $1 bill. This is a $20 bill. See? And on all his money, he's got the pictures of his ancestors. See, them ain't your ancestors on there. See, every day you pull out this money, he makes sure you remember his ancestors. What have we done to make sure that our children remember our ancestors? I can go snatch up any of these black children to name 20 of our Our ancestors for the last 400 years, they couldn't name it. But every time you pull out this money, white folks make sure you remember their ancestors. Now, what does this money say? This money say, in God we trust. See, the white man already done told y'all he God. And he said, this is who you need to trust in. And don't tell me you niggas ain't been trusting in this. You trust in it every week or every 2 weeks that you go get your check. And when you go to church or mosque, the people who tell you to pay the tithe, they trust in God too. See, this is your God, version of God. And when he wrote his Bible, he put his face in there. You accepted that too. That's who you pray to. See, in God you trust. Who your God is. And see, this God right here wants to see you destroyed completely and totally. And it's working. So you better get you a new God. Because see, as long as you believe in these gods right here, your doom is sealed. Your doom is sealed. These are not any gods that are working in the interest of black people. And see, and this is what you're teaching your children to go after. That they need to be all about the Benjamins, them dead presidents and all that stuff. See, this is y'all death. This is your death. This is what this stuff is really good for. Y'all see me setting fire to this? That's what that's good for. But see, a nigga, see, that's what this good for. See, y'all need to get this stuff and make a big-ass bonfire with it. Your children and you have sold your souls for these gods. And you're going to die. Because that's what you made a covenant with.
Free. We have access to a proper education despite what any professor has given to us to study. You have the individual independence of choosing the proper information to educate yourself. So if you don't understand life and womanhood, and if you don't understand children and manhood, and if you don't understand these things, you must make it your responsibility to find out. But I will assure you, if you take your cues from them, you will start to look strange, you will start to act strange, you will return to your community and you will be rejected by your own people because you will think that you're organizing them, and you will think that you're struggling with them, and they will think that you are stark raving mad. As African people, we have got to get along. There is nothing else that you have as an African woman but your man, and as an African man but your woman. Now we get confused, you know, because we take somebody else's history and try to make it our own. But African men have got to understand that we as African women have always understood that our relationship to you is by your side and your relationship to us is by our side. During slavery, African women laid down with white oppressors and had sex, felt repulsive to save the African man. Still looked her African man in the eye and respected and loved him, even though she had to defile her own body that he might exist. African women understood that we were in this predicament together. It was an African woman that walked from Maryland to Canada, which is however many thousands of miles. It was an African woman that put guns to African men's head and said, I know that you've been psychologically indoctrinated and rearranged by this system. I know that you've been devastated by racism and white supremacy. I know that these things have destroyed your mind, but you're coming with me, and if you don't, it's freedom or death, but you'll die right here on the dime.
We have been told that we are living in a democracy. We have been told that we are in a system where there is equal opportunity for everyone. Tragically, we have been told a gigantic lie, and that lie has been told over and over and over and over again. We are living in a system of racism, white supremacy. It is not a system of equal opportunity.
That's why you can come cut my throat. That's why if I borrow $10 from you and don't give it back to you, you ready to kill me. See? And that's not love, you know.
So here you are, recently released from prison, having been branded a felon for engaging in precisely the kind of drug activity that's ignored in middle-class white communities. You're branded.
Are you aware that white people have more genetic diseases that affect their nervous system than people of color, than black people?
I wouldn't be at all surprised. And I think
now,
blacks
would you
have
suggest,
apparently...
Of course your enemies are going to tell you you can either fight or you can go to jail.